that light is a killer. It was a lovely winter day out there, right? And like a nice sunny day.
How are you? Good. How are you?
No, go ahead. I don't mind getting old, I just might get any
Test. Oh, sorry, folks, it works. Good. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Gord, is that chair empty beside you? It's empty. 7, 8. Folks, there's chairs over here. And there's 3, 4, 5. We got 13 empty chairs. Folks, 16. Thanks. Good evening, folks. Welcome to the November Bird Study Group. Again, a healthy crowd. My name's Bruce McKenzie, and I look after, with the help of many, the bird study group for the Hamilton Naturalist Club. And tonight we have a few announcements to make. And we will announce the arrival of our speaker. I know he's on his way because I have spoken to him by phone. Wasn't that long ago, you know, the only thing I had to worry about was the light bulb in the old Kodak projector, and if a speaker was late or delayed, you had no way of knowing because no one had a cell phone. And the post office worked, but it generally wasn't immediate. Tonight, I think we have some visitors in the room. And so those people who haven't been with us before, could I see a show of hands, please? Well, knock me down. Keep your hands up, please. Okay, good. Now we have a special award for the young lady who came the furthest distance. You can put your hand down, sir. And unless you're from Alaska, you're not getting a prize. We have a young lady that's come from northeastern British Columbia, if I remember correctly. So thank you very much. She's what we call a tag-along, you know, tourism, friends and relatives. So is this a relative or a friend? A sister. Okay. Well, that explains it. Thanks very much for bringing. Oh, Peter, are you here? Well, obviously, the speaker tonight is younger, miss. So thank you very much to the guests who have arrived. I'm going to tell you a bit about the Hamilton Naturalist Club. But first of all, was it social media that brought you out, or a friend? So first, social media. Yes, this question's for you. Nobody came by social media. Was it friends or relatives? So I was right, tourism, friends and relatives. This is good. Anybody from outside of the community? You don't have to be as far as British Columbia. Where are you from, miss? What? You got the train back. Is that how you got out? You escaped. I've been following that in the news. Are you still euphoric about getting the train? Is it on a regular schedule?
Actually, I've been here for a while, so
What are you talking about?
I'm sorry. That's my fault. This lady's from Churchill, Manitoba, and I was talking about the fact that the train now, after the absence of a year, the tracks have been repaired, and the train is getting to Churchill, Manitoba again. And this young lady's been away from Manitoba for a little while. She's just waiting for winter to return before she goes back to Churchill. Okay, so ptarmigan, snow buntings, those kind of Red Bull types of things is what she's used to.
Don't forget the goal.
Oh, the ivory gull. Yes, thank you, Mr. Lewington. Okay. So the bird study group is part of the Hamilton Naturalist Club. Those people who are not guests tonight, we're all to be members of the Hamilton Naturalist Club. And the Hamilton Naturalist Club is our 100th anniversary, celebrating next year. It's a long-standing institution with a fine reputation across this province. And if there's anybody who needs further information about the Hamilton Naturalist Club, I'll be here after the meeting, be glad to help you with that. Visit our website, Nature Hamilton, or just Hamilton Naturalist Club, and all our information will come up there. And we have a few administrative things to mention about tonight. First of all, the Hamilton Naturalist Club has always been a strong supporter of the, don't give away the surprise, Mrs. Lewington. Please, it's my show, okay? You want this mic? It's for rent. I'm not usually this belligerent.
Yes. So, the Hamilton Naturalist Club has always been a strong supporter of the bird study group, and in the past, we've always asked the members of the bird study group to contribute at the door to help support the cost of our room rental and speaker honorariums. And where we have fallen short, the Hamilton Naturalist Club has always covered. Well, in the future, the Hamilton Naturalist Club, at the beginning, will be covering the speaker fees and the room rental for the bird study group. Just takes a little pressure off you. Now, having said that, your generosity is always appreciated, and whether it's supporting the Hamilton Naturalist Club or the activities of the bird study group, we certainly appreciate your generosity. Now, we do have a little cash box up on the table here. We are expected to cover the cost of our snacks and beverages. So I appreciate those people who have dumped a small token of appreciation into the cash box at the front, at the cash bar. Well, that's leading up. That's a segue to what I'm going to say next in a minute. Okay. Ask everybody, if you're not on the bird study group email list, please check to see that your name's on the list at the back of the room. Guests, feel free to put your name on there so that you can be circulated with the notices of our upcoming meetings. Now, there's a small group of us who, and we'd like it to be a bigger group, who organize the bird study group. And we're going through some changes. And the biggest change right now is one person Frank Morley, a very important member of our group. Frank's retiring from delivering the coffee and the snacks. So this month, last month, others have looked after it, and in December, the coffee will still be, and tea will still be here and available for you. And being December next month, we are asking for those people who would be so kind to bring in some baked goods so we can all enjoy a variety of tastes. Come January, though, speaking of longer liquor store hours, we're going to ask you to do one of two things. Somebody stand up and volunteer and say, I'm going to be the new Frank. I'm going to brew the coffee and look after that part of the bird study group. Or everybody is welcome to bring a thermal mug and bring your own beverage with you. Now, the advantage to that is you can put whatever you want in the mug. There will be no inspection. You can have decaf, you can have full cap, you can have cold juice, whatever. Remember, the liquor stores are open later in this province. Somehow that had something to do with a financial statement. I tried that at home once. It didn't work. Okay, so between now and January, or any time thereafter, if somebody would like to volunteer and look after the coffee table, please let me know who you are. It can be anonymous. You still have to do the work. Okay. I'm probably way off script. And go back to that one, please, Mike. The Hamilton Naturalist Club. Folks, and maybe I should say this at the RBG at the next month meeting, we are not getting any takers on the vacancies that we have on the board for the HNC. This is discouraging to me, considering we've got our 100th anniversary coming up. There's a few people in the club who are doing an awful lot of work, and we need help. If you haven't considered it for yourself, please do so, or find a friend, find a neighbor, and introduce them to him or her or they to a wonderful pastime. It's called Natural World, and helping out with the community. Okay, next, Mike. The Robert Curry Trophy is coming up at the end of the year, and for those people who are new to the room, we have a long-standing trophy. Used to be called the Ross Thompson Trophy, now the Robert Curry Trophy, and it's awarded to the top youth ornithologists in Hamilton. All they have to do is submit a checklist of birds that have been recorded in the Hamilton study area, and in the calendar year of 2018. Cheryl Edgecombe. Cheryl, where are you? There she is. She's the new Frank tonight. Oh, wow. Thank you for that. And checklists are being received until February 28th. Now, I don't know what has happened. I'm blaming social media, but this award has been given out almost every year since probably the Second World War, except for 2016, 2017. We missed 2 years. A young person with 5 birds on the checklist would have won last year. Okay? Probably could have seen that just on the way to the meeting. Anyways, one of my fellow directors tells me that there will be submissions. So we'll wait and see. And it's interesting when you look at the names of those people who have won that award in the past. There's many of them are still long-standing and active members of the club. And on November 4th, speaking of young birders, Alan Warmington, who we lost last year, started out as a young birder in the Hamilton area, and we just wrapped up on November 4th, the 45th Alan Warmington fall bird count, and just have a short report here because this fall has been wonderful for birders. And first of all, is there anybody in the room other than guests that don't receive the Hamilton Bird Google group? Can you put up your hand if you don't get that email? 1, 2. Okay. Would you like 3? Would you like to? Okay. Because if everybody got it, I'll speak less in future meetings. So who clapped? Okay. Okay. So to do with the Alan Wormington count, Bill Lamont, the editor of the Wood Duck, looks after so many duties for the club, and especially anything that can be tabulated, Bill Lamont seems to tabulate it. Dragonfly counts, butterfly counts, and bird counts. So in a future Wood Duck, the results of the Wormington bird count will be coming out. So keep your eyes open for that. And next, Mike. We've got the Important Bird Area Survey number 2, November 24th. Contact Rob Porter. Rob, you're in the room. Everybody I wanted to introduce is standing up already. Okay. And Rob's at the back. Rob's our field events director, and he's looking after that. Next, Mike. And then we have our midwinter waterfowl census, formerly, no, it's always been called that. George Naylor used to look after that, handed the reins over to Chris Motherwell. Chris, are you here this evening? Okay, he usually is, that's why he's not standing up. And so you can contact him, and the email addresses are on the website, they're in the Wood Duck. And that's coming up in January. Boxing Day is our Christmas bird count for the Hamilton area. Again, Rob Porter's looking after that. And then on the 5th of January, the Peachtree count is coming up. I'm the coordinator for that bird count. So Hamilton is 15 kilometers from Dundurn Castle, I think. That's the circle for the Hamilton Bird Study Group. The Peachtree count is primarily East Stony Creek all of Grimsby, down into Caister Center area, and some Beansville. So if you're interested in doing a count, either Hamilton or Peachtree, let Rob or I know. And it's really easy. You can go out and freeze your butt all day, or you can sit at the living room window and count the chickadees that come to your bird feeder. Okay? So, because both of those numbers are important. And next month, normally in December, Mark Peck from the Royal Ontario Museum is here to pick up your dead birds. Now, for those people in the room that are guests, let me explain that briefly to you. Mark is a curator of ornithology at the Royal Ontario Museum, and the bird watchers from time to time come across dead birds. And that's one of the ways that Mark Peck at the museum is able to collect study skins. So we're not having a turkey roll next month. This is sort of citizen science work. And then in December 3rd, our own David Brewer will be here with his magical mystery bird quiz. This is a picture of two renowned ornithologists. The better dressed one is Mr. Wilson up on the pedestal. David, are you here this evening? No, he's not. Well, it's okay. It was his joke. So David Brewer will entertain us next month, and I just want to remind everybody that due to calendars or whatever with this facility, our bird study group is December 3rd. Okay, usually it's later in the month, but it's December 3rd this year. And holiday treats. Coming up December 10th, Dr. Galbraith, head of science at our own Royal Botanical Gardens, Roots Grow Deep, Trees, Heritage, and Conservation. I think that'll be a very promising or enlightening event, talk. And tonight's feature speaker, he's here. And are we ready, technically, Mike?
Give me a minute.
All right. Jeremy has come from a distance, which I certainly appreciate, and I know you will when we're get to be enthralled with Jeremy's speak. Tonight, Jeremy, where are you? There you are. Stay right there for the minute, thank you. We're just checking technical wizardry here. So just while we're waiting, I mentioned that this fall has been a wonderful fall for bird watching, if not every fall. A couple of highlights. I think the black-throated gray warbler. Where is he again? LaSalle. And there's all kinds of warblers at Sedgwick Park in Oakville. And last week, I think it may have dispersed by now, was a wonderful congregation of fish-eating birds off the shore near 50 Point, Stony Creek, Grimsby. Now, I wanted to ask the experts in the room, the ones with a memory. It was about 30 years ago, I remember, the similar event that was recorded off of 50 Point, and it was in late fall. And this is a time of the year where sometimes the school of cyprinids or minnows and alewives get pushed up into the surface by the salmon below them. This is the type of event that takes place in oceans, where the predatory fish force the schools, and at this time of the year, some of these species form large schools, force them up to the surface. And the aerial predators, the gulls, some ducks like the mergansers, loons, they congregate where these schools of small fish show up. And 30 years ago or so, I remember one morning counting over 300 loons alone off the coast, or off the shore at 50 Point. Thousands of mergansers and the gulls, and it was so interesting to watch because all the birds would be over there. And then you get birds like cormorants or the gulls, and they'd be looking, and all of a sudden something would dive half a kilometer over there. And the whole group would shift. So you got about 10 different species of birds that want to feed on these fish. And within 15 minutes, they've all jumped because the school has changed location. And there's always scouts looking for where the school is coming up. Now, we've had a big weather change since those large flocks of gulls were seen. And so with the weather change, the waves in the lake, the schools, the fish probably got dispersed. But it's just one of those wonderful things about having many eyes out in the world looking for birds, and once in a while these kind of things happen. And Mike, are we on track? Wonderful. Okay, before I introduce tonight's speaker though, is there anybody that wants to tell us where the next great sighting's going to be? Where? Godrich?
Oh, yes, Godrich.
What's up? A Calliope hummingbird? Calliope hummingbird, and I believe there's a hermit warbler in Huntsville. Why has everybody got this blank look on their face? Oh. Okay. What's there now, Sheriff? It's in Godrich. Okay. So is the hummingbird at a feeder, so there's a predictability of it?
Yes.
There's only 5 days in which you can go and see it.
That sounds like a Walmart sale. What's going on? Yeah, why is there only 5 days you can see it?
The homeowner doesn't want people in her backyard.
She could make a fortune. Okay. Well, chasing a rarity, that tells me to introduce my next speaker, our next speaker. Jeremy Bensette is a Point Pelee area birder and naturalist, and he's going to be speaking about a pastime that he had in 2017. He set a goal for himself of seeing the most birds in Ontario by any one individual in a single year. He achieved that goal. I'm not going to tell you the numbers or the highlights. I'm going to leave that to Jeremy. Jeremy's a die-hard birder, naturalist, wildlife photographer. I've picked up a number of magazines recently and see that in small print below the picture, the photographer's name. And there's a few photographers in this group that I recognize their names on national publications underneath photographs. So congrats to Jeremy and to all who have their names under those photos. And Jeremy's a proud member of the Vortex Optics Field Team, active member of the Ontario Field Ornithologists, and a board member of the Essex County Field Naturalists. He takes any chance he can to share his knowledge and insights about wildlife to friends and strangers alike. Jeremy likes to travel and talk birds. And for that, that's why Jeremy's here tonight. And Jeremy, I'd like you to come up. Thank you very much.
Hello. If we haven't met already somewhere in the field, it's nice to meet everyone here. Don't be shy in the future if you do see me somewhere to stop and say hi. So I'm here to tell you about my 2017 Ontario Big Year in birdwatching. It was quite the adventure. Stay tuned. So as I go through my slideshow, am I talking loud enough for everyone? Yeah. Okay, so as I go through my slideshow, I'll try to do my best to remember to identify each of the birds in the photos, just in case anyone's unfamiliar with them. So in my title page here in the top left, we have a sandhill crane from Long Point area last year. The top right is a short-eared owl from my home county of Essex County. The bottom left is a Townsend solitaire from Thunder Bay District. The center bottom is a prothonotary warbler. Maybe a cool trivia fact you don't already know, it's supposed to be called protonotary. But everyone corrects me when I say that, so I don't. And the bottom right is a dickcissel from the Leamington area, the Point Peely birding circle where I live. These are the topics that I'll be covering tonight in my presentation. I'm not going to read them all because hopefully you'll stick around for the whole presentation and see all of those topics anyway. In the top right, we have a red crossbill male from Algonquin Provincial Park. In the bottom right, we have an eastern screech owl and a nice kind of semi-man-made owl cavity at Point Peely National Park. So first, a little bit about myself. So my name is Jeremy Matthew Bensette. The M is important, sort of, in recent times because there happens to be another Jeremy Bensette who lives in Essex County. He's not a bird. I like to think that I'm a fairly passionate young guy with what some might consider a dangerous obsession with birding, wildlife, and conservation. I grew up in Leamington, in Point Peely area. The bottom left photo, you can see a picture of me at about half a year old being held by my dad at the tip of Point Peely. You can't really tell, but this is kind of I like to think it's a pretty interesting little feature. Right here, that little smudge you can see on the beach closer to the trees, probably back behind that sign that they put up that says for people to not go past there, to not scare away the roosting gulls in the mornings in the springtime. There is actually a person standing with a tripod in that photo. So I like to think that perhaps that might be, many years before I met him or her, one of my mentors in birding. I visited Point Peely pretty regularly growing up, from that young of an age, probably until very recently. I had no idea that birdwatching was something that people did anywhere, let alone that it was something that people did at Point Peely more than anywhere else in Canada. I'm certainly not alone in that regard. Most of my peers didn't know that either. And that's a photo of my brother and me on the bottom right at the boardwalk at Point Peely. My main hobby, probably not that much different from many people in my demographic, was video games. My friends and me were way too serious about video games. You could say almost passionate about it. We went on Xbox Live every evening and tried to practice our Halo skills to get better, and it doesn't really amount to anything, so I quit when I found out about this cool thing. I have a psychology degree from the University of Windsor. I never really intended to make a career out of psychology. I did a year of engineering. It was a little bit more than I wanted to commit to moving forward, so I figured psych would be a little bit less painful. I found out about bird watching partway through, as you can tell by my graduation photo. I went to enough class to pass my psych classes. I don't know why. Some might say I'm a little bit free-spirited. So back to that graduation photo. I'd be lying if I said anything other than that it's my graduation photo. It's the only photo I have of me with my degree. It's a selfie while wearing a shirt with nice birds local to Southern Ontario on it. And if you can't tell, that's a Long Point Bird Observatory headband on my head. The photo on the bottom left, that was from before my hair grew an extra foot or so. That was, I think, 2013, after one of those weird tornadoes that Leamington had. There was a downy woodpecker on the road. I went to try to nudge it with my foot. It instead climbed all the way up my leg, up to my shoulder, and it did eventually fly away. It was okay. Some other big interests of mine include insects like moths, butterflies, dragonflies, and basically anything else that I can at least attempt to identify. I like to rear insects in captivity. You can see in the bottom right photo, there's kind of a big screen-covered wooden box with some monarch butterflies hanging in the top of it. I kind of designed and built that myself for the closing stage before the monarchs turn into their butterflies. I didn't get a chance to do that last year, of course, and I didn't do it so much this year either, but I have been known in previous years to be pretty into that kind of thing. The bottom left photo on that slide is my insect sheet. I put that out probably a few nights a week through the summer months, hoping to find something rare, kind of similarly to why a lot of us go to Point Pelee in the springtime. I'm into mammals, herptiles, wildflowers, and gardening. When I say gardening, I mean like kind of natural type gardening. I'm pretty big on trying to give back what I can to the previously natural world that we borrowed so much space from. The center photo in the bottom of this slide is probably the nicest flower I've ever come across in the wild. That was last year while doing my big year. That's a lesser purple fringed orchid from Rainy River District in northwestern Ontario. I'm pretty into tour guiding, educating, presenting, kind of like I'm doing here tonight. Wildlife photography, that's why I include that photo of that ermine, the winter coat of a short-tailed weasel from Temiskaming District from last year, kayak paddling. I've said this joke probably every time I've presented, but you can tell by that photo I'm not the greatest at kayak paddling. And conservation. So some preparation for my big year. I tentatively planned on doing my big year since I began my birdwatching career. So basically, since at some point in 2012, part of a year into birding, I knew that I wanted to do a big year. Hopefully kind of as soon as possible, but not until I was ready. It just so happened that 2017 seemed to be the year to do that. And in the process, I not only focused on the idea of big year birding, but not that I ever did a big year previous to last year, but I kept it in the back of my mind, and I also tried to be as prepared as I could for any and all species that have ever graced Ontario, no matter how common or how rare, for when I get to the point to do my big year, being kind of ready. I made that chart, that 5-tier system kind of off the top of my head in the fall before my big year started, to give myself an idea of sort of priority on which species might kind of overpower others as I was making decisions on what to chase if other people were hearing or were finding them. So in tier 1, that's the biggest bulk of any of the tiers of species. Those are the most common birds found in Ontario, with kind of the front runner, you could say, being that bottom right house sparrow. Tier 2, which is a much smaller group of species, those are still what I considered throughout the year to be guaranteed. They were basically anything in tier 1 and tier 2. I knew that I'd be crazy to go more than like 100 or 200 meters out of my way to cross paths with. Tier 3 gets a little bit larger than tiers 2 or tier 4. 71 species. That includes kind of the lesser common but still very regular species in Ontario, like that left photo, the prairie warbler. So I guess in the prairie warbler's case, if I didn't come across one in the spring migration in my home park, Point Pelee, I would know that I would have to go to their breeding grounds in a pretty specific area of Ontario to catch up with them. Tier 4 are the somewhat rare species, and tier 5 are what I consider very rare. That's the second largest group, and the vast majority of those bird species didn't occur and wouldn't normally occur in a person's big year, no matter how hard they try, because a lot of those species aren't found in any given year in Ontario. So I guess essentially my goal was to see everything in tiers 1 through 4, and hopefully as many as I could in tier 5. Some other preparation. So I landed a pretty cool deal for sponsorship with Vortex Optics Canada. Paul Grant and Val Wyatt, the owners of Vortex, and Ken McRory are very great people. It's nice that they're located right locally in Guelph in southern Ontario. It helped a lot to have kind of a bit of an upgrade to my optics, kind of know that I could get, you know, pretty quick service on my optics if need be, and it didn't hurt to have cool birding clothes through the year that I didn't have to go out shopping for. They were pretty happy to be kind of pushing me to wear their logos on clothes, knowing I'd be out as much as I was last year. I had a work contract with Bird Studies Canada. It was my 4th summer doing marsh monitoring program. So I do frog counts and bird counts across southern Ontario's wetlands for my boss, Doug Tozer, the guy kneeling down in the bottom left photo. And also along with that, I recruited my close friend Tim Arthur to work with me. Tim's here, he's in the back of the room. Wave, Tim. Anyone wants to see who he is? Thank you. Yeah, so I had this funny feeling that if I was randomly assigned a fieldwork partner the way that I had in some previous years, it might be a little tough to just kind of, you know, sort of snap my fingers and change my mind and go on a 12 or 13 hour one-way detour while doing field work in Wasaga Beach. Tim was pretty cool for that. Yeah, that's a photo of Tim and me in front of one of our handful of noble steed rental cars that we used for field work last year. I'll tell you about another one in a later slide. So I told everyone in the Ontario birding community, everyone who I possibly could cross paths with in the year 2016, that I would be doing a big year the following year. I did that in part to try to build up some social momentum from the community, you know, at least from my friends, and, you know, possibly end up getting a little bit more support than that from people who I didn't know all that well. It also helped me kind of concrete the plan of doing the big year in my mind. I would have ended up probably feeling way too embarrassed to continue birding had I quit my plans of doing my big year after telling everyone in the Ontario birding community. So as crazy as that sounds, it ended up being kind of one of the biggest tools in doing so well. Another great tool was that I set my goal to do the best I possibly could. I did not aim to break any records. I didn't even think about things like records. I figured it would be nice if it happened that we had a lucky year. You know, maybe I'd be able to come close if I did my absolute best, but it was my best that I was looking for. And also, I guess along those lines, I think both of these last 2 points in this topic touch on not wasting too much energy in the process of doing said big year. I prepared for months before the beginning of 2017 to not get high-strung or excitable about the idea of chasing rarities that other people were finding, no matter how far they were in Ontario, no matter how long the drive, or how unlikely the chances of them being there still when I got there would be. It kind of turned into this mechanical thing. I just knew I needed to go if a rare bird was found and I heard about it. So the bottom row of this slide is probably the best example of kind of the rewards reaped from not being excitable or high-strung about rarity chasing. Tim and I were doing field work in Parry Sound District, right around here. We heard about a Western Tanager male being found in Sudbury, about right around there on the map. So after we finished our field work, I guess it would have been the next morning, we went on our way to Sudbury. I tried calling these people who had this Western Tanager. They had no idea that I was going to be calling them or anything like that. They couldn't hear me that well because the cell phone reception wasn't that great, so they hung up the phone. They thought I was a telemarketer and didn't answer when I called back a second time. 15 minutes later, we showed up at their house. It might be a little unusual, but they were pretty pleased to see that I wasn't a telemarketer. They were happy to try to do their best to be part of that whole crazy journey I was on. And they said that the second time the phone was ringing when they didn't answer, another part of why they didn't answer was because they were enjoying watching that Western Tanager out their back window. So Tim and I sat at their back window until dark, and we didn't see the Western Tanager. we went back early in the morning. We sat in their backyard for most of the morning. Didn't see the Western Tanager. So we carried on a bit of a jog to Thunder Bay. It was only another 12 or so hours from Sudbury, so why not? Why did we do that? Because there was a tricolored heron that had been found and was reliably being seen for a day or two before that. We got just past Sault Ste. Marie when, I should also make note of, does everyone remember last April, there was one weekend of like summertime temperature, really, really warm weather at the end of April last year. It was like record-breaking warm. This was that weekend. When we got past Sault Ste. Marie, it turned from warm weather into an ice storm. The Thunder Bay District experienced their worst ice storm in, I think, 25 or 30 years that weekend. And lucky for me and my sweater, Tim had 2 spring jackets with him. So I got to wear one. We had a Mitsubishi Lancer rental car, a little kind of, sporty thing with summer tires because it was late April in southern Ontario. And we were experiencing like a centimeter or so of ice on the road. We were being rained on by rain and already frozen ice that all kind of just froze together into ice the whole time we searched. The whole car was encased in ice. We didn't see the tricolored heron in about half a day of searching. We looked in every little spot around the wetlands of Mission Island, except for one puddle that was probably about like one of these blocks of seats in size, maybe even smaller than that. We left, got about 2 hours down the road in terrible ice still, and received a phone call from someone back in Thunder Bay saying that that puddle was where the tricolored heron was. I don't know why we didn't check it, but we actually drove past it about 30 feet away from that puddle on the way in and on the way out. So we turned around, we went back, and just in time to meet a guy who had also just seen the tricolored heron. He was pretty excited, it's gonna be cool, we're gonna see it. He just watched it kind of fly up and over a couple trees. It looked like it was about to land in the grass on the other side of the trees. The grass, mind you, was surrounded, it was more like centimeter thick columns of ice sticking up, covering the grass. Every one of them smashed and fell as we touched them as we walked by. It was really obscure. We didn't find the tricolored heron after another half day of searching. So we drove the 18 hours back home, plus however much the ice added to it. But I practiced not being high strung, so I was pretty cool with it. Maybe not. So this is another piece of preparation. This is not a very positive thing by any means. I guess you guys just saw his name on a slide just before my presentation started. So Alan Wormington, who in the 2 or 3 years leading up to my big year was definitely my closest friend. He was probably the one friend who I saw almost every day for 2 or 3 years leading up to my big year. He lived halfway between my house in Leamington and the gate to Point Peely. So given that he was home and I was home, we crossed paths at some point every day. Alan had bone cancer for a couple of years and passed away in early September of 2016. This really put a spin on things because up until that point, Alan was kind of my birding coach. It was sort of just assumed by both of us, I think, that he would be my birding coach through my big year, as he was with Josh Vandermeulen, a very close friend of mine who held the record from 2012. I basically, I decided at that point that I needed to let that kind of ignite a bit of a firecracker inside of me, and I used that as motivation to follow through. Now it wasn't doing my big year with Alan, it was kind of doing my big year for Alan. So these photos, that left photo with our awesome hat direction and great looks on our faces, that is Alan and me driving in a big loop around Texas in February of 2015. He had his hat like that before I did. He claimed it was to block the sun. I had to copy it and take a cool picture. And the photo on the right here is what I consider Alan's funeral. Steve Pike and me arranged for as many friends of Alan's who we could think of to come to Point Pelee and celebrate his life a few weeks after his passing. But yeah, so not the most positive thing, but definitely a big piece of preparation. Big year history in Ontario. So that first name, this is now the third slide tonight that you're seeing Alan Wormington. Alan, as far as I can gather, more or less officially held Ontario's first ever big year record. In 1981, without really deliberately doing a big year, he ended up seeing 320 bird species in Ontario. So we're talking way before cell phones and emails and things like that. Those were the days that I hope some of us in this room remember more than I do personally. Having a list of 10 or 20 names next to the dial phone, and when a rarity was found out about, you called that list of names in priority to spread the word around about a real good rarity. Yeah, so that was about the most that they had going for them. And like I said on top of it, Alan didn't plan to do a big year that year. He was just ridiculously good at finding birds. I don't think there are many birders in this province who don't regard Alan as the #1 birder ever in Ontario, because he kind of was. It wasn't until 1996 that Glenn Cody set out to do the first real all-out hardcore big year in Ontario. He smashed Alan's record with 338 species. I'm sure Alan was probably pleased with that, seeing as he didn't mean to do his big year anyway. And it wasn't until 2012 that Josh Vandermeulen beat Glenn Cody's record by 5 species with 343. That was the year that I met Josh. And that stood at least until the beginning of my big year. We'll get to that in a little bit. So now let's get to some highlights. This is probably the cutest highlight slide of my presentation. This was in Ottawa very early in the year on January 4th. I got to Ottawa, I was looking for great partridge, called John Ruddy because I was having a hard time finding great partridges. He told me he was just about to call me because someone had just emailed him a photo of a boreal owl and he wanted to make sure that I could catch up with one for my big year. So that was kind of the first of a number of what I sort of consider magician type moments by John and Bruce DeLabio, another great Ottawa birder. It was like every second time I drove into the city of Ottawa, one of those two guys either knew of or found a real good rarity. And why I was already 8 hours away from home in Ottawa, not knowing it was there is beyond me, but it worked out really well. So that was a great example. I met up with Chris Traynor, who's kind of the owl master of the Ottawa area, to help me hopefully re-find that boreal owl, that real cold purpley gray one on the right photo. And in the process, I spotted that even cuter left photo, northern saw-whet owl, directly above Chris's head while we searched through some cedar stands. If any of you have never seen a northern saw-whet owl, it really is probably about the cutest organism on Earth. They're about the size of a can of pop. And yeah, they look just like they do in that picture. And also, if anyone is interested in the pace I was on, this is species number 66 and 67. So this is another owl highlight slide. We're now moving a month forward to February 10th and 12th. In Thunder Bay District, I came across that great gray owl in the left photo, which is the world's largest owl species, is actually the 4th great gray owl I found that day. The 3 I found before that were all within one spot. They were 3 consecutive hydro poles along the Trans-Canada Highway. This one won the prize for the best photos from a little town called Matheson. And then 2 days later, on February 12th, I came across species number 114, a northern hawk owl. This northern hawk owl was from about a month later. The photos were just a lot nicer, so I used it. I think that was hawk owl number 6 of 8 or 9 last year. On February 12th, I found 3 northern hawk owls. Tyler Hoare, a birder from the other side of Toronto, told me before this trip that I was more likely to see a northern hawk owl perched on a tree on the side of the Trans-Canada in Cochrane District than I was an American crow. He was right. I saw 0 crows and 3 hawk owls that day. So now we're moving forward another 2 months. April 15th, species number 180, black-necked stilt. This was a huge highlight, partly because I think this was only maybe the 15th ever record for Ontario, and partly because this was by far the largest group of black-necked stilts ever found in Ontario. A girl who ended up, I guess a year or so later, becoming a friend of mine through my Essex County Field Naturalists Club, Sam Dundas, ended up finding these when she was home for break from field work in Alberta. That was pretty cool. They're a little bit flashy too. I can't complain about how they look. This is the colorful rarity overload slide. So this is about half a month later. Species number 229, 230, and 231 in kind of a nice little loop around the center part of southern Ontario with Tim. The bird on the far left photo, a crazy rainbow colored thing, is a painted bunting male. If you are not already aware, that species occurs naturally, natively in the southern United States and south of there. It seems a little obscure, but yes, that thing survives as a species. And it ended up totally wild in Ontario, as they do at some point, more or less every year. The bird on the right of the 3 photos was species number 230. That's a white-faced ibis. Hopefully you can kind of see that white in the face. I've had a few people while showing these slideshows with a little bit lower quality of a projector screen than this ask me why it was called white-faced. But yeah, that was a very nice iridescent colored bird. That was in Lindsay, near Peterborough. And a western tanager male, the center photo. You might recall that from an ice storm story from a few slides back. That was certainly a big highlight, seeing as we missed it on the way up and on the way back. I should also note that crazy western tanager tricolored heron story, both of those birds were seen a day after we got back to the city. So yeah, that was definitely very nice. And that was in Dwight, just south of Algonquin Park. Actually at Algonquin naturalist Rick Strauss's house. This is what I consider the rarest bird of the year last year. This was big ear species number 301, mid-June, a violet green swallow. If you think this bird is flashy, would you believe that there's an even more colorful version of it in the male plumage? This is a female. She was doing her best at attempting to hybrid breed with a male tree swallow right at the edge of the city of Thunder Bay. They had a tree swallow box. It got to a point where she even laid eggs after I was there to see it. Unfortunately, they didn't have the proper protection from squirrels, and a red squirrel got right inside the box and destroyed and ate the eggs. Her and her tree swallow partner were nowhere to be found a day or two after that. This was especially a cool highlight because of kind of the method of transportation to get there. So Josh, who I've mentioned a few times, the at the time current big year record holder for Ontario, he's a little bit more organized than I am with his field work. He collects a heck of a lot of aeroplan points while buying gas to do his field work traveling. And he figured he had a little bit more than he needed to and offered to fly us both to see this violet green swallow. This was, I believe, Ontario's 3rd record at the time. So we were out of Toronto, got these cool photos, got back into Toronto within 19 hours. That, you know, kind of the trip in itself was a pretty big highlight. So we're now, I guess, a week and a half or so later. Species number 305, a scissor-tailed flycatcher. This, I believe, was at Marie Curtis Park in Mississauga, which is not too far from here. This was a real cool highlight, not only because it was a great rarity from the south, but look at that posture in flight. we got to watch it fly around and hunt over a big grassy meadow for probably an hour or two. And it almost looked like it was kind of walking on its fanned out scissor tail feathers as it tried to scare off the dragonflies and grasshoppers and things like that from said field. This was a pretty big highlight. Some of you might recognize the species name there or the map. The map's a little bit different in this slide. So this was species number 314, about a month after the last slide, a tricolored heron in Toronto. Why does that map look a little bit different? Why does it say 22 in some hours instead of 18? A little bit further distance and kind of looking like it's in the wrong direction versus the last one? Because Tim and I were in Rainy River District when it was found in Toronto. So that trip in itself was pretty crazy. I am not one of those people who falls asleep while driving. If I was, I promise I would never ever drive through the night. I just don't get tired in a way that would ever lead me to fall asleep. Hopefully some of you can relate. I'm sure most people can't really relate to that. But yeah, so basically, Tim and I kind of decided we needed to go to Rainy River District as part of this now sort of team big year that we were doing. That's a very liberal driving time to get there from home. And I did take that route. I wasn't really into cutting corners by going through the United States. It just didn't seem like the greatest idea, just for political reasons, and the chances of finding a rarity on a highway were high enough that it seemed worth it for that too. So it's more like 25 hours of driving generally to get from Point Pelee area to Rainy River. We drove through the night to get there. When we got there, it was around midnight. I found some real neat laurel sphinx moths nectaring on some nice flowers on the roadside. So instead of following through with what we were doing at that road, trying to find a piece of flat limestone to set up a couple tents on and crown land to sleep for a few nights, I photographed laurel sphinx moths nectaring in the dark for 2 hours. We got about 4 hours sleep that night. The following evening, we went to the Sable Islands Nature Preserve at Lake of the Woods to try to hopefully come across yellow rails. We did not. We got about maybe 5 hours sleep that night, and then the third night we went back to try for yellow rails again. We went a little bit further, probably stayed up a little bit later still. Didn't come across any yellow rails, but it's okay because I practiced not being high-strung about these things. We had some pretty good targets that we caught up with in Rainy River District, plus that cool purple flower in the previous slide. So on the third day, we heard about this tricolored heron being found in Tommy Thompson Park in Toronto. I figured that was about long enough that we were in Rainy River District, kind of soaked it in a fast-forward, sleepless kind of way. Drove through the night back to Tommy Thompson Park. We got to Tommy Thompson, I think at around lunchtime. It's only like a 4.5 kilometer walk from there to the ponds in the middle of like just the hottest days of the summer. So did that. We got there, saw the tricolored heron. Somehow there was a little bit more energy on the walk back and the drive home after that. That was, of course, a very cool highlight to catch up with. Yeah, so I guess it was probably about 21 or 22 hours back to Tommy Thompson Park. You can see by the photo on the left of that slide, it paid off. This is what I like to think of as my most exciting bird of the year last year. This is a wood stork in Ontario. This was, it was found by a friend of mine named Mark Nenadov at the tip of Point Pelee. Mark was a new birder last year. It was his first full year of bird watching whatsoever, and just 2 days before, I guess it was August 12th when he found it, 2 days before that, I saw him at a sewage lagoon. He wanted to see his first ever, I think, pectoral sandpipers and short-billed dowitcher, which are, as some of us might already know, pretty common migrant shorebird species. He said he wanted to do whatever he could to try to help me with my big year, and what could I suggest he could do to look for in the process. And I told him, go to the first section of the field guide to where all the really large birds are, get used to all the ducks and geese and different kind of obscure large birds because they're a little bit easier to pick out if you do happen to cross paths with them. 2 days later, he found this wood stork at the tip. So I guess I gave him good advice, sort of. He would have found it anyway. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a wood stork. It's about as exciting as it looks. That was the species actually that for 2 or 3 years before doing my big year, I joked with my friends every time, well maybe half the times that I left the tip before they did, that if they find a wood stork, please call me before anyone else. I really wanted to see a wood stork. It was my highest sought after bird in that region, and there may or may not have been certain wording in an email that suggested just how much of a highlight it was. From what I understand, that email received an unofficial award at that year's OFO convention. Use your imagination if you don't know what I'm talking about. That was species number 317, so mid-August. This was a pretty cool one. This is getting a little bit closer to this location. This was my record tying species, number 343. This was a mountain bluebird on November 19th at Snyder's Flats in Waterloo. This was, you know, I mean, it could have been any bird. It was an incredible highlight, just the fact that it was the species number that tied the Ontario record. A really cool thing about this is Josh Vandermeulen, who I mentioned before, he came out and met up with me at this spot when I was seeing this mountain bluebird. He was very, very supportive throughout the year, like I said, with the violet green swallow. So yeah, that was really exciting. Tim, were you there for that one?
Yeah, I showed up later on.
Yes, okay, that's right. And then we all kind of jumped around and screamed in our high-pitched voices and stuff. This is the record-breaking bird, 1 day later. So, I apologize for having a people photo and not a bird photo as the main thing on this slide. If you can tell in that little top right corner there, there's kind of a gull loon sort of shaped thing, kind of purpley gray colored. Its beak is pointing this way, its body is sitting on the water going that way. That was a young northern gannet that had been found earlier that day along the coast of Lake Ontario in Hamilton. So at that point in the year, it was turning into almost like a chess game. So basically Tim was doing more or less all the traveling that I was doing with me. And in the process, I came to this understanding that since more than half of all of Ontario's people lived in Toronto and Hamilton area, more than half of all of Ontario's birders probably did too. Many of them, most of them, would have the days off, Saturdays and Sundays, and would be working throughout the weekdays. So I knew that I had to be in this general region, the kind of, metropolis area of Ontario, in case one of those many birders with their days off found a rarity on the weekends. During the weekdays, when I knew the stakes weren't quite so high for people potentially finding rare birds, I was traveling out to Eastern Ontario, to Ottawa and to Cornwall area, in hope of coming across massive flocks of geese to find a pink-footed goose, or purple sandpiper, or gyrfalcon, or some other kind of Arctic migrant that's a little bit more regular in Eastern Ontario. Tim and I woke up that morning kind of going through photos and things like that in what I refer to as my camper, my Ford Escape truck. And after tying the record the day before with now almost a month and a half to go, it seemed like that was a good morning to just kind of hang out and talk about cool memories that had happened so far. Because of that, while we were sitting at a service station in Kingston, we heard about this northern gannet. We otherwise would have been all the way in Cornwall and wouldn't have been able to get back to see this northern gannet. So Tim and I got there. Richard Port, who I must imagine is a member of this club, he's certainly a Hamilton birder, was waiting there with his telescope so that we could run up, throw all of our gear on the ground, and look at it through his telescope. That was already very exciting. It was more exciting kind of knowing that Josh was there just a little bit further down the path, the guy who I keep mentioning who held the record, I guess, up until that day. Josh was very happy to come over and celebrate with us, and so was, kind of to our surprise, the fourth member of this photo, Sarah Lamont. Sarah is definitely a member of this club. Hopefully many of you know her. Her dad is Bill. So we heard a car door close while we were kind of just starting to celebrate, moments after seeing this bird. Turned around to see Sarah walking down the trail towards us. Sarah was and is one of my closest birding friends in Ontario. She was one of my biggest supporters last year, along with Josh and Tim. So it was awesome to have three of my closest friends right there for what at this point goes down as kind of the most exciting moment of my life. Can you see the northern gannet just behind Tim's shoulder? No. Yeah, so November 20th, number 344. There's a little bit of irony in that. I think almost exactly that date, maybe 1 or 2 days off of that, was when Josh saw his 343rd bird species in his big year. So from there, things got a little bit lucky in the world of people finding rarities in Ontario. There were 2 more bird species that were found that were new to my big year list. A barn owl was number 345 in kind of my neck of the woods in southwestern Ontario. That one, probably for reasons that most of us understand, hopefully all of us, you know, for some pretty serious conservation problems with the species of barn owl. It was a very, very limited audience, and if anyone is kind of curious, the barn owl wasn't there as of maybe a week and a half later. Hopefully it survived. I like to think that it did. But yeah, number 346 was a tufted duck, not far from here in Port Credit. That was found by Luke Fazio, and I just have 2 photos there because the one that much easier identifies it as a tufted duck isn't really that nice. It's kind of just sleeping with its head tucked in. The one on the right is a little bit better. At least it's kind of making some eye contact with the camera. So that's December 16th. I guess another thing I should mention about the barn owl, it happened a day before my birthday. It was probably by far the most exciting birthday gift I've ever received. Probably the biggest surprise too. So some missed bird species. I really feel like there were not many. These are what I consider the nearly guaranteed species that I missed. These were tier 4 bird species from that 5-tier system I mentioned before. So gyrfalcon, which is that big bird of prey perched on the photo on the right there. Laughing gull, purple sandpiper, which is the species in the bottom left photo there, and yellow rail. I can't say that Tim and I didn't put in the groundwork to hopefully come across any of those 4, because we certainly did. And they were all seen somewhere or another in Ontario last year. It's just that we weren't around to see them. Purple sandpiper hurt the least because the day that we missed the most purple sandpipers was the day that Bruce DeLabio pulled a razor bill out of a hat for us. I'm pretty okay with the razor bill instead of my like 8th purple sandpiper. Some other likely species that I missed. Mississippi kite, which is that real sleek looking bird of prey on the right there. That's a photo of mine from Point Pelee from the previous spring. That might not seem the most likely to many birders. It isn't, but I'm pretty sure I've probably seen more Mississippi kites than any other birder has in the last maybe 6 years in Ontario. A big part of that is because the vast majority of them seen in the province end up at Point Pelee. Last year and this year were the only 2 years of my birding career that I didn't see and or find a Mississippi kite. Swainson's hawk. I'd only seen one before in Ontario, but last year was, at least of the years that I've been birding, it was by far the best for sightings of Swainson's hawks. There were, I don't know, probably somewhere between 6 and 10 Swainson's hawks found separately on hawkwatch sites last fall. There were even a couple found in springtime hawkwatch sites. Yellow-throated warbler, that's that real crummy quality photo in the bottom left of this slide. That's my only photo of a yellow-throated warbler from Ontario, so I used it. That's a bird species that's pretty rare in Ontario, but they generally show up in the mid to late fall, maybe even in the winter. They often come to bird feeders. That was the case last year. There was one in Elmira, right along a nice public trail. I tried my hardest to bribe that yellow-throated warbler to present itself to me with about $90 or $100 worth of bird seed and suet cakes and bird feeders and things like that. And it at least helped maybe a dozen other birdies be able to see it. I just couldn't stick around. I guess there were just too many rarities to chase that other people were finding. So it only hurts so bad. And willow ptarmigan. Willow ptarmigan, very far northern bird species, generally only seen in even remotely accessible places in Ontario without flying in the winter time, like Moosonee and further north than that. Last year, a willow ptarmigan was found in a public park in Toronto. So, Josh Vandermeulen and Dan Riley and me were the OFO featured birdathon team last year. We decided ahead of time we would do our big day on a certain day in May. That ended up being the day that this willow ptarmigan was found by a guy named Noah Marcus in Toronto. And we kind of just decided that we wouldn't chase it. We just finished our big day quite well. I'm going to get to another thing about the willow ptarmigan in a second. So these are some missed rarities that were found in Ontario that aren't normally found in Ontario that really kind of hurt a little bit. There was an ivory gull found about a 35-minute drive away from my house in Essex County. I was there within about an hour and a half of that sighting. It was long gone. It was found a couple days later in Flint, Michigan. Unfortunately for the bird and its not so hot population species, it ended up passing away in Flint, Michigan. At the same time, somehow, as far as this big year mission went, it made it, it was guaranteed that it wasn't going to be flying back to Ontario at that point, right? So it made it a little bit kind of relaxing to not wonder where that ivory gull was. There was a rock wren and a lark bunting, both found within about a week in Tobermory and on Flower Pot Island, just north of Tobermory. I couldn't go for the lark bunting right away because there was terrible weather. It was preventing any boats from getting to Flower Pot Island for a couple of days. So a week later, when this rock ptarmigan was found by Ken Burrell, and I believe his family was there for Thanksgiving, on the rocky beach in Tobermory in Bruce Peninsula National Park, I figured since I already had a nice scenic attempt anyway at that rock wren, it wasn't there the next morning, I would just take the glass bottom boat tour to see the shipwrecks over to Flower Pot Island, since that's kind of the only way to get there. It was also scenic. I didn't see either of those birds, but it's all right. The rock wren, I stayed home for family Thanksgiving. It doesn't hurt that bad. You can't really look back and regret being around for a family holiday, right? So there was a gray kingbird and a Cassin sparrow found on the tip of Long Point, a tropical kingbird up in Temiskaming district. That tropical kingbird was the only flycatcher I tried to chase the following day after it was found last year. I had this strict rule, Tim can attest to it, I did not chase flycatchers if it wasn't the same period of daylight. Flycatchers are really high metabolism, and they're almost never in the same spot the next day. If they are, like our great kiskadee in Rondo Provincial Park lately, they stick around forever. But tropical kingbird was a little bit too rare, so I went for it anyway. White wagtail and Costas hummingbird, they have stars around them in this slide because they were both new to Ontario's bird checklist last year. They had some interesting kind of details surrounding those sightings and their chaseability or not. The white wagtail was found in Niagara Peninsula on, I believe it was right on Easter, or at least Easter weekend. A lady who wasn't really into bird watching saw a bird that was pretty unique on her front yard, took a few pictures of it. A couple weeks later, those photos circulated to my friend Josh. I think it hurt him a lot more than it hurt me because he was like 20 minutes drive from that person's house and found out about it 2 or 3 weeks later. The Costas hummingbird, that might still be a surprise to many people in this room who do kind of keep up on the rarities in Ontario. There was a Costas hummingbird that was very, very heavily suppressed in Eastern Ontario last year. Unfortunately, from the way I understand it, a bird bander got in touch with the person who had that Costas hummingbird coming to their feeder and went through any hoops they could to convince that person to not share it with any other birders. That's semi-understandable, of course, but they then live tweeted it on Twitter as they were banding it with photos and things like that. I don't know. I don't really see that as too cool, but we'll move on from that. The photo in the top left here is a lark bunting from that Texas trip with Alan I mentioned before. The bottom right photo is a gray kingbird that I found in Hillman Marsh in 2015. That was when the missed willow ptarmigan hurt the most. I asked Noam if he could send me his photos of said willow ptarmigan, and it was just pretty brutal. It still kind of hurts looking at it. I've never seen a willow ptarmigan. But anyway, I'm really happy for him. He was on fire. He was actually the guy who found, I think he found the scissor-tailed flycatcher and the fork-tailed flycatcher last year. I know he found a fork-tailed flycatcher in Ontario for sure. So a bit of a conclusion to kind of statistically to my big year. My final count was 346 bird species. That of course broke Josh Vandermeulen's 2012 record by 3. Luck, without a doubt, played a huge role in the success of my big year last year. If I tried to suggest anything other than that, I'd be completely lying. But along with that, if you've ever witnessed someone suggest to me that I'm just plain lucky when it comes to birding, my favorite reply to that is we make our luck. A combination of the studying, the time kind of, beforehand, before doing that big year preparing, and as well as just the exposure time in any given sort of unit of time looking for birds. I like to think that I definitely, do roll more 6s, so to speak, in the world of birding than most birders do, but I like to think that I roll the dice a heck of a lot more times than most birders do. So if you're kind of in the market for hopefully finding rarities or chasing rarities, I hope it's a little bit inspiring if I suggest to just roll the dice more times. That's a photo of Josh Vandermeulen and me, all smiles but pretty tired-eyed after long drives back to my hometown from who knows how far away to see a magnificent frigate bird last year. Some other statistics. I traveled about 102,000 kilometers by road last year. I traveled about 86,000 of those by my trusty Ford Escape camper. It still lives today. It's quite healthy. I drove it here tonight. That is equal distance to a trip from Halifax to Vancouver about 17 times, or the circumference of the Earth about 2.5 times. Halifax to Vancouver could be pretty interesting. I don't know. I like that kind of randomness of all over Ontario rather than doing that more than maybe 3 or 4 times. It would probably get boring by the 16th or 17th time. And the circumference of the Earth, it would be a lot of driving over water. That can't really be that scenic. So I'm pretty glad that I stuck to Ontario. Some environmental implications of a big year, kind of related to conservation. I am very quick to admit that driving 102,000 kilometers in a year for something that involves appreciating nature is not an environmentally friendly practice. With that said, I don't plan on doing that again. And also, I like to think that because I went all out on it, and it got to a point where kind of flatteringly there was quite a bit of media coverage over the big year when it was nearing its end and after it finished. I like to think that that hopefully caught the eye of quite a few people who are otherwise not so interested in birding, wildlife, and conservation. And perhaps it even inspired a number of young people, maybe my age or younger, to get into wildlife and get into conservation through that process. I think it's a good thing that competitive bird listing, bird chasing, big years are not really everyone's cup of tea, because it really could end up putting a serious carbon footprint on our Earth if everyone did that every year. Yeah, so I like to think that it inspired enough people to make up for that carbon footprint that I did leave on Ontario. Along with that, like I've mentioned a little bit before, much of my own personal time, both voluntary and professionally, revolves around conservation initiatives. So I'd also be crazy to not make it very clear just how grateful I am of the support of Ontario's entire birding community, and all the other people in my life who aren't directly involved in that birding community. Every person in this room, for the fact that you came out to see this presentation, I imagine quite a few of you knew at least somewhat that it was happening while it was happening. I'm appreciative to every individual here for that, and every member of the Ontario Field Ornithologists Club, my Essex County Field Naturalists local club similar to this one, a couple of other local naturalist communities, Vortex, like I mentioned before, eBird, because I don't think the majority of people who are into bird listing in recent years would be if it wasn't for eBird sort of doing it for us. Like I mentioned a little bit, my family and friends, who are by no means birders. Well, my friends from before I was into birding. Yeah, the fact that they probably would have understood if I missed Thanksgiving is pretty cool. Yeah, and I guess the first point, I didn't really touch on that in this slide. Ontario, if you don't already know this, Ontario really is one of the most active and most effective birding communities of any region, even close to this size, in the entire world. The ABA might be a little bit easier to quantify that, the American Birding Area. We are known across Canada and the United States as one of the top birding communities of anywhere in North America. Our Ontario Birds Facebook group has like 11,000 members in it. Many of those are not from Ontario and are only in that group because they don't have a similar thing in their state or province. The bird in the photo on the right is an osprey. So what has been gained or learned through the process of doing this big year? I like to think that kind of the biggest thing that I gained through that crazy journey has very little to do with a bird list. It has a heck of a lot to do with just general life kind of lessons, if you will. It firmed it in my mind, without doubt, that we live in a really awesome world full of many really awesome people. I was already a pretty strong believer of that, but it's like set and super good now. I proved to myself that I'm capable of anything that's, physically possible by a human body. I like to